Okay, so we're back again talking about Tom Clancy. Was he just an author or was he an intel agency asset as well? And there's been rumors swirling about him ever since Hunt for Red October came out, because there's a lot of stuff in it. People were like, how do you figure that out? But I wanted to go back now and reread the original core books all the way through Teeth of the Tiger, and say, okay, is there really some little warning signs, some things that kind of flash and say, yeah, he was getting information from somewhere, whether or not he realized he was an asset or people were just feeding him information and saying, here, publish this. Was he getting help? I'm trying to answer those questions. And this time we're looking at Some of All Fears, which was published in 1991. Also had a movie with Ben Affleck. Now, I've talked about the book before and I've talked about the movie and said, hey, they're kind of close. Well, somebody came back and was like, oh my God, they're so far apart. This is the book for Some of All Fears. This is my first edition copy of it. It's almost 800 pages long. Now, to convert that to a script, to have everything that took place in that book take place in a movie, the script would probably be more than 800 pages. It's a lot of detail per page in a book that doesn't wind up in a script. So somewhere you're going to have to do some conversion work. It's going to wind up probably a little bit longer. Let's say it's a little bit shorter. But let's call it 700 pages for sake of argument. Call it 600 pages for sake of argument. Now, in those 600 pages, to convert one page of script to the screen, it's usually about 1 minute per page. 600 pages, that's a 10-hour movie, give or take. They're not going to convert the whole book into a movie. So the theme of the movie and the theme of the book are pretty close. There's differences, but you just didn't really have a chance to do it in any other way. Now, Tom Clancy himself, and this is kind of important in trying to figure out, was he an asset or did he know more than he let on? He was educated by Jesuits. So Jesuits are this group of Catholic priests. He went to Jesuit schools, Jesuit colleges, and Jesuits have always had sort of rumors swirling around them. Are they connected to the intel agencies globally, not just in the United States? And in the book, the Jesuits actually come into play, and you can really tell Tom Clancy knows that world really well, throughout the writing. Now, there's even rumors that say, hey, look, maybe the Jesuits have toppled world orders before, or has toppled nation states before, and they're really into spycraft, and I don't know. But the interesting thing is, here's another connection for this insurance agent that became a writer that says, hey, he's actually plugged in the intel community. So there's another pathway for him to get there. Was he or wasn't he? Let's keep digging in. Now, the big question for this book is, sort of where in the timeline is it? So I put this handy dandy guide together, shows where we are. In publication order, this book comes six. Hunt for Red October, Red Storm Rising. Red Storm Rising is not a Jack Ryan book. It is a large scale sort of World War III, what could happen book, that was co-authored with Larry Bond, although Tom Clancy's name is the only one that appears on the cover. The copyright page, the introduction, I'll give credit to Larry Bond. And the interesting thing about this book, I think, is it is so much different from the others, even in the writing style, that I'm like, how much did Clancy really have to do with it? Did he was just sort of like threw suggestions out? Was he told, hey, go write this one with Larry Bond? Who knows? The two apparently met at a war game convention. They were both really into that. And Larry Bond actually wrote a war game along with a bunch of great books. But that book is so much different. It leads me again to some other questions, and it didn't hit me how much different until I was reading this one, because in Some of All Fears, there's actually a large tank battle, which also there's some of that in large tank submarine battle, whole thing going on. And there's some of that in Red Storm Rising. Well, a lot of it actually. And the style was just so different in between those two. I'm like, Larry Bond had a lot more to do with that than people let on. But then there's Patriot Games. These are all publication or Carter the Kremlin, Clear and Present Danger. Another great movie came out of that one. Some of All Fears. Now, in chronological order, Red Rabbit gets kind of tucked in between Without Remorse and Patriot Games. Without Remorse was published next. Red Winter is a fairly new one, published long after Tom Clancy passed away. But that is essentially the publication order and the chronological order for where we're at. I have not done videos yet for Without Remorse. I'm going to read that one next. I have not done one for Red Rabbit. That one comes later. I'm reading them in publication order. Red Winter is going to come much later just because it was published much more recently than the rest. Now, where else does this go, right? Or where else are we going? Now, this particular book, Clancy, previous to this, was publishing about the United States and Russia sort of Cold War stuff. Suddenly that's gone because in 1991, the Berlin Wall is down. You've got which happened a little bit before that. But now Russia's kind of fallen apart. It's not really the USSR anymore. They're starting to become our friends. It hasn't really fractured into different states yet, but it's kind of in that process of them sort of falling to pieces. And that plays a major part in the book, which is weird to me because politically it just about lined up with those events. And here's an 800-page book that hit the market right at the right time. I mean, come on. He saw something coming up, and I was alive then. I was old enough. I was kind of paying attention. You can kind of see it coming, but he got it just so dead nuts on. It was just incredible. But the interesting thing is, as soon as we see, Russia's falling apart, the book shifts from that Cold War sort of mentality to, oh my gosh, let's go look at the Middle East. Well, again, that's kind of what was going on in 1990 was there's sort of this thing going on in the Gulf. Well, we've got Gulf War One with President Bush. It happened, with Desert Storm was going on, then turned into Desert Shield was going on, turned into Desert Storm later. But the interesting thing was that he sort of nailed that as well. Like, hey, that's the world's next hotspot, which was interesting. Now, the general concept of the book is if small guys, if little bitty countries or terrorist groups want to defeat big guys, they have to find a new way to fight each other. And in this book, what they do is the little guys, in this case, it's sort of this German group that came out of World War II, wanted to get Russia and the United States to fight each other because they didn't have the means to fight either country. So, hey, let's get the two big guys to go duke it out. And then after they're done duking it out, we can sweep in behind them because they won't have anything left to fight us. Which I found kind of interesting. But the book opens actually in the 1973 Yom Kippur War, which is sort of a flashback. And that becomes important because in that war, in the book, he claims a nuclear weapon was lost in the desert. So we needed a way for this group to find find enough weapons grade material to make a nuclear weapon that comes into play in the book. And interesting way to do that is say Israel lost one in the sand. Now, if you go look at that, go, oh, implausible, implausible. The United States has lost like 8 of them. There's one in a swamp someplace we still can't find. There's been a number of them lost over the years, so it's not that far-fetched to say there's one sitting out in the desert someplace nobody ever found because it kind of fell off an airplane at some point. It's happened. But once we get the flashback out of the way, we say, okay, what's going on here? Now it's coming into sort of modern day for the late 80s, early 90s. And what we're looking at is a bunch of post-World War II governments kind of transforming. And in the early sort of 2/3 of the book, it asks the question, is world peace really possible? Can we really do it? And if we're going to do that, it really has to focus on the Middle East. We have to kind of get that part of the world to calm down. At least at that point in time. Now we'd have to get the Middle East and Ukraine and Russia to stop beating each other up if we really wanted world peace. But at the time, it was really the Middle East was the problem. So I found that kind of interesting because it sort of was perfect for that release date because that's really where things were going. But again, the book opens up with something going on in Israel, big shocker, and it brings up an interesting point that the only way to get support from the United States is if somebody like Israel or other places have a functioning democracy. We kind of tend to focus on democracies, right? We don't go off and say, hey, look, you're a totalitarian government. Let's partner with you, right? We don't do that sort of thing. But what happens if that changes? And what happens if Israel loses the moral high ground? And what I mean by that is, for a long time, they really did hold the moral high ground in the Middle East. Current history, there's some argument on is that or is that not changing? And our support for Israel is starting to wane a little bit. So the book asks that question, hey, what happens if somebody loses that moral high ground? What do we do, right? Do we support them still or do we not? And that's actually an interesting question that we're asking right now here today. And we still haven't gotten an answer, but we're starting to see the impact of what happens if that moral high ground is lost. And it very clearly kind of brought that up in the book, which means Tom Clancy was not only, living in the day, he was looking forward. And you can kind of see that problem at the time. Now we're seeing it sort of live action, but it was interesting that he brought that question up. Now, like I said, a German group, a group of fascists, is trying to re-rise to power, and they're trying to do that by baiting two large countries, us and the USSR, into fighting each other. And by doing that, it really gets into nuclear weapons. It really gets into nuclear power and what that means. Clancy goes on for probably 30 or 40 pages in different spots, not all at once, about what does it really mean to say, okay, I'm willing to push that nuclear button. I'm willing to say, hey, look, let's launch a nuke and go kill 60, 70, 80, 100,000 people. And not all of them military, right? So you're going to you launch a nuke, you're not going to just take out military, you're going to take out civilians. And he goes to great lengths to point out that the World War II weapons that were dropped in Hiroshima and Nagasaki were minuscule by comparison to what's out there today. I mean, teeny tiny by comparison. They're just no, those two don't belong in the same category of what can be done today versus what was done then. And he also brings up sort of a theme that he brings up in all of his books is how far are people willing to go for power? Would you kill someone? No big deal. Would you get militaries to fight each other? Yeah, thousands dead. Who cares? Serial killers really have nothing on politicians in that regard. But would you build a nuclear weapon if you were a third party, like you're a terrorist organization, you're pick it, Iran or some country that wants to come to power, would you build one and purposely kill a whole bunch of civilians just to get two other countries to fight each other to kill a whole bunch more people? What does it take? What kind of person does it take to do that? And Clancy kind of dives into that a lot, which is interesting. But while this whole thing is going on in the front of the book where they're trying to really kind of craft world peace by getting this giant peace treaty in the Middle East to take place, there's a whole drama thing going on with Israel. That's sort of like an entry point while we're politically distracted, right? The United States is politically distracted. We're trying to make peace in the Middle East. We're trying to make peace around the world. All of a sudden, we're not looking. Does a third party group like the Nazi group in this one, the fascist group in this one, say, okay, I'm going to go take advantage of that chaos. The United States is distracted, right? The United States is off doing their thing, and I'm going to take advantage of that. And if you look around the world today, we're in the middle of political chaos, and there's certain parts of the world that are just kind of falling apart. And that chaos is sometimes used by people to say, hey, look, the United States being typically we wind up being world police, whether or not we're supposed to, we wind up doing it. Are they really going to pay attention? Can I get away with it? Well, look at what's going on in the Middle East. Right? Look at what's going on between Ukraine and Russia. We're not real. I mean, we're sending weapons, we're sending money, but we're not saying, okay, we're going to park the 82nd Airborne here and really fix this, right? And we are very politically distracted and very politically divided, which is basically what Clancy was saying here was when that happens, the rest of the world kind of goes nuts. Now, the whole point to this book is that, hey, this group is going to use a bomb, a nuclear bomb to kind of really piss off the United States and make them go after Russia. And they're going to put that bomb at the Super Bowl. Really not the place you want to put it if you want the United States to be happy, right? We kind of like our football here. And he goes to great lengths. And by training, I have a PhD in physics. I've worked in nuclear physics. I've been to Los Alamos National Labs. I've had decent level security clearance. I don't anymore. I'm completely out of that world, and I would never reveal anything anyway. But what he points out in the book is that nuclear weapons are nothing really more than just a massive amount of explosive in one place. And the bomb really isn't that complicated to build. It was in 1940, but it's not today, not with modern machining, not with modern equipment, not with modern chemistry labs. If you have the material, you can build it. Getting the material is the harder part, especially plutonium bombs. Uranium bombs, really hard to get the material. Now, I did a whole video about the difference between uranium and plutonium bombs. It's on my channel. Check it out. If you're really curious, I won't go into all the detail between those two different types of weapons here because I already have a video on that. But the details Clancy goes into, and he goes into it for like 60 pages in this thing, 60, 70 pages of this is details on how to build a nuclear weapon. He is spot freaking on. But the thing he points out in the afterword is that everything in the book was already in other published materials. It's basic physics. It's basic nuclear physics now. It's not a big secret because you can't really keep physics a secret. Once it's out, it's out. And the rest of it is just math. If you can do the math, you can figure out how to build a bomb. That getting that material is the hard part. And he points that out as well. We've got to keep a handle on that material, or we've got a problem. And you can't uninvent nuclear weapons, so it's going to be there. Now, Clancy does show concern, moving on from that, Clancy does show concern about the United States breaking into multiple nations. What would happen? How many nukes would we lose? And in the book, Russia actually lost a couple because they were in the process of kind of falling apart. Um, but and that didn't necessarily tell me whether or not, give me any hints as to whether or not Clancy was um, part of being whether he was an asset or whether he was just an author who was really good at connecting dots. But one of the things that came into mind was that, this was 1991. The reading public was starting to look for, not necessarily 800-page monsters to go read. Clancy was famous at this point, so it didn't matter. It was going to be, a bestseller no matter what. But the dude goes on for like 150 or 200 pages trying to convince us that Jack Ryan and his family are like these ultra good, perfect humans. They never do anything wrong. I mean, they have a little argument. The wife suspects him of doing something, but they work it out. They work it out, instantly, right? Um, so, modern editors would rip some of that out, right? They'd be like, dude, you're slowing down the story. You're going in a direction that has nothing to do with moving the main story of the book forward. Modern editors would probably pull that. Um, but did he get help from somewhere? Or was that just sort of they let him get away with it because he was Tom Clancy? I don't necessarily think that adds into that was he an agent or an asset thing. But it was interesting to look at and say, he really would not get away with that today. Now, Clancy does get long-winded because he's really into technical details. They're all there. Now, the main point of the book is the nuke, right? Which doesn't really go off until two-thirds or three-quarters of the way through it. And the description Clancy gives of that detonation process not only is spot on from a physics perspective. I mean, I had to go get books out and kind of look at it, right? And go, is this really how it would work? Spot freaking on. But it's also stuff that would have been published prior to this. So it's not like, he had to go off and look at some classified thing. It was all well known. But the physics of it was so good and so well written that even me, having worked in the stuff and having my doctorate degree in it and published papers in it, all that, I had to go look stuff up. But he was dead on the money every single time. And again, here we have an insurance salesman who gets his advanced physics absolutely correct. And was he kind of having? And yeah, you could get it from other books that are out there, but did he have somebody kind of help him connect those dots? Did he get access to the right people pretty fast? But it was just crazy to me how he kind of got it exactly right. And at the time this was written, think about this for a minute. If a nuke goes off in the United States, this is 91, right? It's not 2024. It is 91. Um, we're pretty much going to assume it's Russia at that point. And how crazy would the aftermath of Russia and the United States be of those two, of us two trying to figure out? They're saying, hey, it wasn't us, right? We're saying, yeah, it was. No, it wasn't. Yeah, it was. It's going to be absolute chaos. And what happens if people in leadership positions on both sides start making shitty decisions based on incomplete intelligence? And the interesting point about the book towards the end that kind of hit me was that it also makes the point that everyone assumes just because it took the effort of pretty much every nuclear physicist in the country and tons of money at the end of World War II to develop these weapons. That's not what it takes today. It is absolutely not that way now. If you had somebody rich enough, you had a country rich enough, you had, some number of millions of dollars, not billions, millions of dollars, and you had the material, you could build one of these things. It's not that difficult. Um, and that I think is what he was trying to drive home with this book was, hey, look, the threat of nuclear war is not just Russia and the United States now. It's Russia, the United States, it's everybody everywhere because you can't uninvent that technology. The physics is just known. It is what it is, right? So if you can get the material, you can build the bomb. But the book kind of came out at exactly the right time for that, right? Because military budgets were being sliced, intelligence budgets were being sliced because we're not fighting the Cold War anymore. But how do we track nuclear weapons? Well, that budget's being sliced. And he kind of comes out with this, for lack of a better term, propaganda book at exactly the right time to drive home that should be taking place, which led me to a couple of pages of notes here on, was he an agent or an asset? So let's think about this for a minute. Hunt for Red October comes out in 84. First print run was 14,000 copies, which is a huge print run for 84. It winds up on Reagan's desk. He has a movie deal, like basically right as the book comes out, which was actually already kind of in the works before the book was published. just from galley proofs. Massive budget movie for a debut author comes out. Sean Connery, it's a great film. Comes out in 91. But for a first time writer to get that kind of movie, that's weird. So that one, that book had a whole bunch of stuff in it that had a lot of people going, huh, something's bizarre here. Red Storm Rising, another perfectly timed book, because at the time of this one, we're kind of thinking, hey, is World War III really possible? And here it is. He writes this book that says, hey, nobody really wants to fight World War III because nobody's going to win anyway. It's going to be bad. We should all just kind of get along. And it was written with Larry Bond, and I swear Larry Bond had more to do with that than Tom Clancy did. And the book really got into the head of a lot of soldiers and saying, hey, if you're the boots on the ground soldier, what's it really take to have to fight a World War III, Iraq, Afghanistan? What's it crawl inside that head, right? Which in 91 hadn't really happened since Vietnam. And I think this put that back in the public's head quite a lot. And basically said, hey, let's avoid a war if we can. Patriot games, right? Again, he connects a lot of dots. He says, hey, look, terrorism is probably what's going to get us. And if you really want to solve terrorism, all countries have to work together. And that was pre 9/11. And shortly after 9/11, all the big countries were working together and we were kind of getting in front of terrorism. Now we're not working together anymore. I'm not talking about mass shootings here in the United States. That's a different thing. I'm talking about, terrorist operations like London was like the British were dealing with from the Irish. We've dealt with from 9/11 and some other instances. Cardinal the Kremlin comes out after that. That's an Afghanistan Russia thing, and basically it's a big propaganda push for missile defense, right? It's saying, hey, look, we need a missile defense program because if we don't have it and the Russians do, a good missile defense program can actually shift that balance of power and make a nuclear war winnable. And our push to do a missile shield, and the way I think a lot of it went at the time, and this was written in 88, the big push for the missile shield at that point was, hey, if we build one, why don't we just give it to everybody, right? And then everybody's got it, and we don't have to worry about it anymore. And that can actually take the pressure off of global nuclear war. Then comes Clear and Present Danger. Clear and Present Danger to me was just absolute propaganda saying, Bush the first needs help improving the intel budgets. And who better to have in office at that time than George Bush? And when that book came out, he was coming into office and he needed the help getting more funding for the agency. And sure enough, that book comes out at just the right time. It kind of helped him do it. Then this book comes out and says, hey guys, nukes aren't as, hard as they used to be. You got to watch out for that. Right. And then sure enough, we start watching that a little more closely and that threat kind of starts to decline. And sure enough, we haven't seen one. Although I think there are certain conditions in the world right now that I think it could become possible again in the near future, unfortunately. And I think it's probably going to be somebody in the Middle East that launches one. And I'm not sure it's that far away. And I don't think it's going to be against us. I think it's going to be against somebody else in the Middle East, but we'll see how that goes. I have written a book on that topic as well. And it's on my website if you're going to go see it. It's called The Last World War. But to answer the question of was he an agent or was he an asset? I'm leaning more and more towards he was getting information from somebody, because if you line all this stuff up in a row, his books are being published at exactly the right time for their topics. It's like, exactly what the world needed to hear from hey, let's get behind solving this problem, comes out in this, entertaining forum and gets movies put behind it, becomes bestsellers. And here's this insurance guy putting it all together. And I'm not saying he wasn't a smart guy. I'm just saying he was either the luckiest bastard on the face of the planet, or he was having somebody help him connect those dots. Was it a Jesuit connection? Was it an intel agency connection? I don't know. But I think whether or not, he may not have even realized he was getting that help. He may have just had people kind of whispering in his ear, and he took and ran with it. But there's just way too many coincidences here for me to just be like, oh yeah, sure, he was just a guy who sat down to write books. Maybe he was, maybe I'm completely wrong. But when I started doing this and rereading this, I was sort of like, I saw this documentary that's on one of the streaming channels that said, oh yeah, sure, he was an asset. And I was like, no way. But the more I read through these books and line it up with what was going on in history at the time, the more I'm kind of like, I was 51-49 for a while. If you had to ask me today, I'm probably 55-45. He was an asset. And now I'm going to go off and read some more of them. So, let's see how far that continues to go. But wow, did he just sort of nail some things just perfectly as far as timing and topics go. And if you look at some of the writing, things hitting 800 pages of technobabble. I mean, there's 100 pages of advanced physics in this thing, and chemistry, and have editors not pull it out. I mean, come on, somebody was whispering in somebody's ear. But anyway, I'm going to keep reading the next one. Next one's Without Remorse. So everybody have a great day. Click like, subscribe, follow, drop me a DM, whatever you want. If you don't agree with me on the whole, was getting information from someplace, let me know. We can, put together a video and we can argue it out. But everybody have a great day.